Shall we start?
Just a minute, ma'am.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and regards to Dr. Saurabh Kole, who is our Kolkata branch.
Ma'am, your voice is not coming.
Can you hear me? Hello. Am I audible now? Hello. Hello.
Hello?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Ma'am, your voice is coming very slow.
Previously it was coming all right.
Hello.
Yeah, it was coming properly earlier.
Now it's audible. Hello.
Okay, it is fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Now it's okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But slow, a little bit slow.
Shall I switch to headset?
Hello.
Now it's okay?
Yes, yes, absolutely fine, ma'am.
Okay. So I'll use the headset. Fine. Shall we start?
Now, so let me introduce yourself, isn't it?
Yes, Shorabha, I was just waiting for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a continuous program of structured training and educational program for the nurses. And here today we are going to discuss a very important topic, nursing care of the epileptic patients. So it is very, very important, essential, because sometimes these epileptic patients may go to cardiac arrest even. So this training is of immense importance, and the nursing care of epileptic patients in emergency, in critical care, and even in the ward is of very much importance. So we have with us Dr. Shobana. Dr. Shobana, she is a consultant in critical care and stroke medicine in Institute of Neuroscience in Kolkata. She is also the executive committee member of our Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine Kolkata chapter. Now I request Dr. Shobana to start her deliberation. Dr. Shobana, please.
Thank you, Shorabha. Thank you so much. Uh, uh, as you know, we will be talking about the care of the patients with seizures or convulsions, but all seizures may not be manifested as convulsion. That is important. So we need to know what is a seizure, how to recognize a seizure clinically, diagnostics tests, care when the seizure is ongoing, medications, and complications. The chapter actually is huge, so I'll try to do justice to it as much as possible. Now, what is a seizure? A seizure is a sudden, uncontrolled electrical disturbance of the brain. And the convulsion is a physical manifestation of the seizure marked by jerky movements of part or parts of the body. There may be a loss of consciousness, there may not be a loss of consciousness. And when there are two or more seizures, at least 24 hours apart, and when there is no proper identifiable factor, then we call it an epilepsy, right? Now, a typical grand mal epilepsy would involve a prodromal phase with mood change that may precede a seizure by hours or days. Then there is an aura, that is, a patient feels a premonition of impending seizure, and you can see there may be some visual activity, auditory hallucinations, or gustatory movements, followed by the ictal stage, which is usually the convulsive stage, tonic-clonic convulsions, and followed by the post-ictal stage of confusion or drowsiness, irritability that occurs after the seizure. Now, over here, I would like to mention that sometimes there is a hemiparesis, that is paralysis of limbs of one side of the body, that may persist even up to 7 days, and that is post-ictal Torts palsy. Now, since we are talking about critical care nursing, I just want to start off with this critical care nursing chart, which we have in our hospital. You can see these are the vitals. These are the pupillary sizes that we record, the GCS, and the pain scale. And of course, here the intake output chart and the bowel movements, etc. So this is part of the chart. I have broken it up into different slides so that it's easy for you to visualize. Now, sorry. Over here, apart from the other charts, we have a GCS chart, which is documented every hour. The best eye-opening speech, then vocal response, then the motor response, etc. Then below it, we have the seizure chart, where we document the type of seizure, whether it is focal seizure or a GTCS or just an absence attack, and the duration. So every hour, the seizure chart is one important component of a neurological ITU chart, right? And of course, you have other oxygen ventilation, ABGs, reports, investigations, etc. Now, as a nurse, what we need to know is, we need to know the initial nursing care that starts immediately after the seizure onset, knowledge of the timing, action, side effects of all the medications that are given if you have to intubate the patient, because we will be coming to the next questions, that you have to know what are the drugs you have used during intubation when a person is having a seizure, because that is very important, because some medications may obscure a seizure, right? If the patient is having an active seizure, put him in a sideline position, keeping the bed end elevated, side rails to be padded so that there is no trauma, and have adequate suction supplies available so that there is no aspiration. Initial resuscitation should go on simultaneously. You have to evaluate neurologically the level of consciousness, GCS, the pupillary inequality, if it is there, and if there is any focal deficit, that is, suppose a seizing patient moving only one side of the body and not on the other side. We should be always prepared to obtain an IV access as soon as possible, because most often we would be giving medicines IV. We simultaneously, we need to monitor and document the type of seizure activity, the factors which are precipitating it, whether it is a sensory seizure, motor seizure, whether there is any abnormality, behavioral abnormality, and the length of the time of total time of which the seizure happened. Simultaneously, we should do the diagnostics, including the EEG and the neuroimaging facilities and the labs, which we will be talking about later. From the emergency department to the inpatient department and from the ITU to the wards, there should be a continuous communication about patient details, the types of seizures, what precipitates it, and the drugs given, right? This is the recovery position that would be taken, that would take care of prevention of aspiration in a person who is actively seizing. That applies to any unconscious patient. You take care about the neck, of course. If there is any trauma, obviously you are not going to handle the neck without proper support, right? Now, let me show you the we do continuous EEGs in our department. So I would just show you how ITU EEG monitoring goes on. These are just to show you how to pick up a seizure when it happens in your ITU. Over here, you can see actively seizing patient, and you have the continuous EEG monitoring. And you can find out that the activities are going on. There will be artifacts because of limb movements, but then we filter it and find out the sharp wave, which we find over here, right? This is another patient who had a super refractory status epilepticus. Now, look at very carefully the eyes. They will tell you that he is having a seizure activity. You can see the subconjunctival hemorrhage because of repeated convulsion. You can see the subtle movements. These are the subtle movements of seizures. I'll show you once again. Look at the eyes and the lips. This is a seizure attack. Very subtle. If you are not alert, you will miss it. Right? This is another of his episode. Just watch his hand, repeated movements. Look at his eyes turn to one side. Look at the hand. Look at the eyes blinking. You would seem as if he is awake, but he is not. He is in a seizure. So these are the subtle signs which you should not miss as a bedside ITU nurse. Look at the hand. You might think he is trying to remove the mittens, but that is not so. That is a stereotyped seizure which he is having. Now the seizure is going off, waning off. Now he's become post-ictal drowsiness, right? Now this is a typical EEG recorded bursts of electrical activity, and we give a test dose of lorazepam or midazolam and look at the background slow activity then. That is how we test at bedside. This is one more video of this lady had autonomic encephalopathy. Look at the focal facial twitches. Now it's very difficult sometimes to say whether it's a seizure or it's just a dysautonomic movement, but her eyes were also telltale evidence of having a seizure. Now it's ended. That's ended, and now she is becoming once again drowsy, post-ictal phase, right? So this is one more EEG where you have bursts of sharp wave activity. These are all electrical activity. Now this man, once we gave him enough of anticonvulsants, these sharp waves persisted, but later on there was suppression. This is the burst suppression. Now this video will not play, so let us go to the next EEG. This is once again sharp discharges. Discharge after we loaded with more anti-epileptics, the discharges decreased but persisted, and later on it settled down with a background slowing. Right? This is the importance of bedside EEG. Now look at this boy who is still admitted under our unit. Look at the legs. Seems rhythmic. Is it a seizure or it is something else? He has these episodes of hyperventilation, sweating. He becomes tachycardic, heart rate going up to even 160, and this kinds of movements, and his blood pressure shoots up at that time. This boy is a case of encephalitis. He's 2 months down the line. He's still in the ITU on tracheostomy, off ventilator, of course. But these are probably autonomic spells, dysautonomia, which is very well known in encephalitis. But this boy also had epileptic attacks, and he had a status epilepticus as well. So it was initially very difficult to differentiate his dysautonomia from epilepsy. But later, when we did repeated EEGs and that came out to be no discharges, then we settled down that this was dysautonomia. Now, there is a question to all of you. Which of these drugs may mask a convulsion? Because you are all ITU nurses, you may use many drugs, which will not cause overt seizures or convulsions like this. Which of these may mask it? Can we get your answers? Some of them have raised hands, so I think, yes, we already have an answer at tracheotomy, right? All of you seem to know that. I'm very happy about that. So that is the precaution. If there is somebody with a seizure or epilepsy in your ward, avoid the paralyzing agent, because that will mask the seizure attack from precipitating a convulsion. Now, what about non-epileptic attacks, which may, these are basically psychiatric patients who feign a fit, Usually consciousness is preserved. They do purposeful movements, poorly coordinated thrashing. Back arching is very typical of non-epileptic attack. Similarly, head rolling and pelvic thrusting, very typical of non-epileptic attack. But of course, back arching is also seen in another type of disease. Do you know that infection? I'm sure many of you know. Back arching is typically found in which disease? An infection, which is not very commonly seen nowadays, but you might see off and on. Anybody? Very good. Shilpa Blesson has already written tetanus. Excellent. Right. So how do we assess and diagnose? Apart from the other assessment, main things in case of a patient with seizures, we have to do those who are already on anti-epileptic medication, we have to do the serum level of anticonvulsant agents. Neuroimaging, whether you do a CT scan or MRI, you will decide according to your doctor will decide which is needed. EEG, I have said, is very important and helps in determining the diagnosis as well as the prognosis. Video EEG is where you keep the patient in a room with continuous video monitoring and EEG monitoring, so that you can find out if there is an overt convulsion, whether there is a simultaneous EEG activity. We diagnose these kinds of non-epileptic attacks with video EEG. When there is a psychiatric patient admitted with non-epileptic attacks, we simultaneously do the video of those movements as well as EEG of the same, and we try to establish a diagnosis that it is an NEA or a non-epileptic attack. And a CSF study is done whenever it is needed. So this is how the EEG leads are attached. The technician, EEG technicians do it, but then ITU nurses should also have a fair idea of that. Now, in diagnosing a seizure disorder, which of the following is the most beneficial? I'm sure all of you will answer. Brain scan, skull radiograph, lumbar puncture, or EEG. Which one? Excellent. Everybody knows that it's the EEG, right? So as ITU nurses, I think I will concentrate on status epilepticus because that is how we get patients in our ITU. A 5-minute or more of continuous clinical array of electrographic seizure activity or recurrent seizure activity without recovering between the seizures. That's it. Why the 5 minutes gap was chosen? Because of the fact that if you don't abort the seizure, it will lead to complications, permanent neuronal damage, that is brain damage. Not only that, of course, the other complications like trauma, aspiration pneumonias, and even cardiac arrest, as Saurabh told you, that somebody can go on seizing and have a cardiac arrest as well. So emergent treatment is paramount in status epilepticus. That is why it is of so much importance. Now, it may be a convulsive status epilepticus where there are overt convulsions, generalized tonic-clonic, or they may be just coma, lethargy, confusion, or focal deficits like Todd's paralysis. Right. Now, non-convulsive, where you have EEG findings of seizure, but you don't have any overt jerky movements of the limbs. Often we get all these patients in, since we are only a neurological hospital, the wandering confused patient presenting to us, or the patient is simply mute, altered mental status, or just a tonic eye deviation, like I showed you in that video. So these are the subtle status. Here, EEG is a must to diagnose. And as soon as you diagnose, you can put them on medications and that will abort it and they become conscious once again. So it's very important to diagnose this condition. Now, non-convulsive may be negative symptoms, even aphasia, mutism, coma, catatonia, confusion, or positive symptoms like agitation, aggression, sometimes automatic movements, blinking, delusions, laughter. Not n number of findings you can get in NCSE, that is non-convulsive status epilepticus. Now, what is refractory status epilepticus? Where you have given an initial IV benzodiazepine, then the second line anti-epileptic drug with a full loading dose. Even in spite of that, if they have clinical or electrographic seizures, that is refractory status epilepticus. What are the underlying causes for all this? It may be metabolic sepsis, infection, stroke, trauma, hypoxia. Hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy is very common to cause status epilepticus. Autoimmune encephalitis is another condition which is very important. Most often they have pre-existing epilepsy or alcohol use, and in children, the inborn errors of metabolism. In the last 2 years, from 2019, 2021, what we find is post-COVID status epilepticus is very, very common, even in those patients who've never had a seizure in their life. So this is another entity. So what are the diagnostic workup? Immediately when you get a seizing patient into your ITU, first check the blood glucose. If there is a hypoglycemia, it is the easiest treatable cause of epilepsy, right? So you correct the blood glucose and the epilepsy vanishes. Monitor the vital signs. ECG is equally important. Sometimes Stokes-Adams or due to complete heart block, people often are brought saying they have convulsion, but it is actually a Stokes-Adams. So an ECG is very important. CT scan in most cases we would be doing. Of course, you will be doing the ABG, blood glucose, urea, liver function test, sodium. Another very common cause of status epilepticus is hyponatremia, and these are correctable, mind you. Calcium, magnesium, ammonia, arterial ammonia, because most patients those who have epilepsy will be on sodium valproate or lacosamide, and these can cause a very high ammonia level, and that would precipitate another seizure attack, right? CPK level, why do you think we need to have the CPK level measured? Any idea why we should be having the CPK level measured? There is one answer. Let me see. Muscle, right? Muscle is if there is suppose you want to distinguish between non-epileptic attack and epileptic attack. Somebody who is seizing very well, their CPK will be very high. But suppose it's a psychiatry patient who is just simply thrashing around with pelvic thrusting. If you do the CPK level, then the level will be low. And of course, if there is too much of convulsion and very high rhabdomyolysis, we will say CPK level running to 10,000, 12,000, then there may be a acute kidney injury. And that is why you need to rehydrate and look after this aspect as well. That is why we need the CPK level. And of course, those who are already on anti-epileptic drugs, we need to have the anti-epileptic drug level as well to find out what caused the status. And of course, those high volume centers who are monitoring super refractory status epilepticus, you need to have continuous EEG monitoring. Now, you will do an MRI if there is any particular reason why we should do it. Lumbar puncture is done only in cases of suspicion of CNS infection or autoimmune encephalitis, of course. Suppose there is something fishy about the patient, you are suspicious that there might be any intoxication. In that case, we need to do toxicology screening as well as tricyclic antidepressants, euphyllene, cocaine, alcohol, etc. Now, suppose a 36-year-old alcoholic arrives in the emergency with GCS. GCS is low, pupils are unequal. What are the tests you will order? ABG, a CT scan head, CBG, all of the above, none of the above, or only the CBG, or only the CT scan? People have raised their hands. I think you'll have to answer in the chat box. Somebody has said CT. Of course, we will have a CT. Yes, somebody has answered all of the above. Another one has answered all of the above. I would opt for all of the above because ABG would want to know to find out how much of acidosis is there, what are the gases, etc. CT scan, CBG is of course very important. Alcoholics are often hypoglycemic, so we can abort a seizure if we correct the hypoglycemia. Before that, what will you give in case of alcoholics with hypoglycemia? Before correcting the glucose, you have to give some injection. Which is that? Thiamine. Excellent. We have an excellent group over here. We need to give IV thiamine before giving dextrose. And CT scan of head. Since you know so much, I want to know what you are expecting. I've given a clue over here. Pupils are unequal and this is an alcoholic. Anybody? Any wild guesses as to why I want a CT scan done? Hemorrhage. Excellent. These alcoholics often have falls and they might be landing up with brain contusions or subdural hematomas or extradural hematomas. Excellent. I think you all know quite a lot. So initial therapy, pre-hospital, what you would do is you should recognize the status epilepticus. ABCs are very important, airway, breathing, circulation. You have to apply airway adjuncts or supplement oxygen, hypoglycemia to be corrected. Of course, thiamine to be available before that. For pre-hospital, IM midazolam is often preferred because you need not store it in the refrigerated, and IV lorazepam needs to be stored in refrigerated. You can use midazolam nasal sprays often. Of course, you have to prevent any aspiration from happening. If you are good enough and you have facilities, you can give a lorazepam. Adults, you will start with 4 milligram IV and repeat once again, if not controlled. Now, in the emergency department, you would give additional benzodiazepines, that is midazolam, lorazepam, if it is still the patient is seizing, 5 to 10 minutes. But look out for respiratory depression and hypotension. By that time, you will be taking him into ITU, and here critical care management comes away. You have to take care of the airway, position the head, all must be done simultaneously. Administer oxygen, look at the pulse ox, send ABGs, intubate, if necessary, immediately secure the airway, saturations, blood pressure, heart rate, rhythm, sinus rhythm, or what. Vasopressor support, if you've given boluses of lorazepam, midazolam, blood pressure may fall, so give adequate fluids and maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure. CPP, check the glucose once again, and because often hypoglycemia is precipitates once again. So once you diagnose it, correct it, then have your IV access and be ready. The urgent control of status epilepticus, the next lines of drugs, we'll come to that later. Simultaneously, you must examine neurologically pupils, GCS, and any hemiparesis or focal deficit. Lab tests to be sent, and wait. If you have given the urgent medication, if they are not responding, they are going into refractory status epilepticus, then we will have to give IV infusions. A catheter, urinary catheter, must be in place, and continuous EEG monitoring if you are going to give him IV infusion of midazolam or propofol or pentobarbital, right? And MRI, most often the MRI is done, at least in our hospital, we would go for an MRI epilepsy protocol for looking for meningitis, encephalitis, mass lesion, usually a contrast MRI. And a lumbar puncture is indicated only in case of infections or autoimmune encephalitis, right? So what is urgent control? The immediate control is with IV benzodiazepines. Then if it doesn't stop and you have given adequate doses, 2 doses, and it is there is no hypoglycemia, hyponatremia, whatever, then you will load with phenytoin, fosphenytoin, phenobarb, valproate, or levetiracetam. In our hospital, we use levetiracetam nowadays because it is much easier to use. Phenytoin, you have a lot of issues like hypotension or arrhythmias. Fosphenytoin is better. It doesn't cause that much of hypotension, but then it gets converted to phenytoin, and that's how it acts. So it takes time to act. So goal is that we must have the seizure control within 60 minutes of arrival into the ITU, right? What intermittently you may use these drugs in after you have controlled the status epilepticus. Suppose he has a brief seizure, you might use diazepam, lorazepam. These are the doses used. Midazolam, often used 0.2 milligram per kilogram, maximum 10 milligram. But these are the respiratory depression, hypotension is what you must look out for. Fosphenytoin is 20 milligram per kilogram of phenytoin equivalent, right? And here, once again, it might cause hypotension, arrhythmias, but it doesn't cause first dose hypotension. Lacosamide is often used these days, and levetiracetam should be coming up because these are recommendations from Neurocritical Care Society. So at that time, the levetiracetam was not in much use, but nowadays it is number 1. Other drugs, phenobarbital, topiramate, valproate, all can be given. With valproate, you have to be careful about hyperammonemia, pancreatitis, thrombocytopenia, hepatotoxicity, right? Now, suppose the patient does not respond to all these drugs also. That means he is going into a refractory status epilepticus. You have to intubate because you have to use IV infusions. What are the infusions? Midazolam, propofol, pentobarbital, and if nothing works, then ketamine also. But in case of certain autoimmune encephalitis like NMDA encephalitis, ketamine would act better. So we would put ketamine just after midazolam in these patients like we do in our hospital. But we have to continue the other second line agents like phenytoin or levetiracetam, lacosamine. You go on adding one after other. Even you can use you can put a Ryle's tube and put the oral formulations as well, like perampanel is used because it acts via the AMPA receptors. So you have to block different kinds of receptors, GABA receptors, sodium channel blockers, AMPA receptors, etc. So use an array of drugs and get the seizure control. You must have a continuous EEG monitoring just to know what is happening, whether the seizure is getting aborted or there is burst suppression, right? Now, propofol related infusion syndrome. What happens? Rhabdomyolysis, metabolic acidosis, cardiac renal failure, none of the above, all of the above, some of the above. There is an answer, all of the above, correct. Now, what are the drugs we use for refractory status epilepticus? Midazolam infusion, 0.2 milligram per kilogram, loading, and 0.05 to 2 milligram per kilogram per hour infusion, right? Pentobarbital, next would be midazolam, then propofol. But we use propofol only for 24 hours. After that, you get all these side effects. Then we use ketamine, then only we use thiopental or pentobarbital. Phenobarbital is often used. Now, ketamine, corticosteroids are often used next to midazolam, because all these, why we use corticosteroids is that epilepsy, or status epilepticus or refractory status epilepticus precipitates autonomic dysfunctions and autoimmune dysfunctions. That is why it might precipitate an autoimmune encephalitis-like picture. That is why we give immunosuppressants. We typically use methylprednisolone, 1 gram for 5 days, pulse doses, right? Now, how long should you treat this refractory status epilepticus, which will be dictated by your ongoing EEG. Now, either the seizures must abort or there must be a burst suppression, as I showed you in that EEG, at least for 24 to 48 hours. Then slowly, gradually withdraw the infusion, but you add on, suppose somebody was on a midazolam infusion, you add an oral clobazam with him, say 10 milligram BD, and you take off the midazolam slowly in 24 hours. That is how we do it. So what is the indication for continuous EEG? When seizures are not aborting for more than 10 minutes, the people are comatose, post-cardiac arrest situation, periodic discharges, of course, trauma patients, subarachnoid hemorrhages, and suspected NCNC when patients have an altered mental status. Now, treatment endpoint is either you have no seizure activity, background slowing, or diffuse beta activity, or burst suppression, 8 to 20 seconds interval. That would be enough to withdraw the infusion and keep them on second line drug maintenance dose, right? Over here, I would like to mention that if you are transporting the patient while on infusion for MRI or other things, some centers have EEG, which is done in the department and not in the ITU. In that case, you have to keep the medication continuously running during transport. Do not miss doses of scheduled anti-seizure drug. Suppose somebody is on midaz or propofol infusion and you have to give the levetiracetam or phenytoin dose. Please don't miss the doses. Keep on giving it even during transport. So, and vasopressors may be needed during transport. So you have to be careful. You have to have MRI compatible syringe pumps, etc., so that you can infuse. What about pregnancy? You have to control seizure in the mother, otherwise fetal outcome would not be good. Clonazepam, fosphenytoin are used, but birth defects may happen in valproate, phenobarbital, and even in phenytoin, fetal phenytoin syndrome. Levetiracetam is a good choice these days, right? If there is eclampsia, high blood pressure, and seizures, then magnesium sulfate is superior. One more caution. Can you tell me what has happened to this patient's hand? Any wild guesses? Let me tell you, there was an IV access over here. Vasospasm. Yes, I think you are trying to tell me the correct thing. This patient has had an IV access, and he was getting IV phenytoin through this access, which extravasated and has led to tissue necrosis. So phenytoin is actually a dangerous drug. This patient had to be operated, and there was plastic surgery done. Then only he could recover. This happened quite a few years back in our hospital, but nowadays we don't have these things happening because everybody has learned. So take home message is that we have to aggressively manage patients with status epilepticus. Benzodiazepines are often, we are frightened to give full doses, 10 milligram of midazolam or anything. So we give 2 milligram, but that is not going to abort seizures. So for seizures, you have to use adequate dose. EEG is a must to support your treatment. Diagnostic workup and treatment should go in parallel, and stabilization of patients. We have to measure the medication levels because we can easily measure levetiracetam, phenytoin, phenobarb levels, for sodium valproate levels as well. So if you are going to measure the level of phenytoin tomorrow, please don't withhold the night medication today. You give the night medication tomorrow morning. Before you give the morning dose of phenytoin, send the phenytoin level early in the morning. That is how the level should be measured. You have to think about other drug to drug interaction, feed and drug interaction, renal and hepatic dysfunction, and medication adverse event profile while initiating and building up the dose of the anti-seizure medications. And of course, there is diet does play a role in aborting seizure. Those with super refractory seizures, often we talk to a dietitian and put them on a ketogenic diet, that is a fat diet. So that sometimes helps in aborting the seizure. I think I would stop there, and if there are questions or comments from Dr. Kole. There is a question. I think I'll leave it to Dr. Kole to make a comment.
It's a wonderful deliberation, and you have covered all the aspects of management of epilepsy in this short span of time. And so what is the question, or if any question is there, I think that Dr. Shobana will definitely ready to answer. Can you see any question? I didn't find.
There was one question about tetanus, how
Okay.
they could diagnose. Now, tetanus diagnosing is usually they have a tonic contraction of the body. It doesn't go on jerking like that. Clonic contraction doesn't happen. It is a stiffening, back arching, or opisthotonus is very typical of tetanus. And patient is usually conscious. They are not unconscious. In case of convulsion or epileptic attack or seizures, usually there is some altered sensation until and unless it is a focal seizure, right? And of course, CPK level would be high in both. And then the history. In tetanus, you may get some history of trauma or bite or anything. Sometimes you don't get, it is a very trivial trauma which is not come to your attention. And in case of seizure, of course, you will have the history of convulsion or seizing activity. If you don't get that, of course, EEG will definitely clinch the diagnosis.
So any other question? 3 participants raise hand. So I can't see the questions, but if you see, just go through it.
No, I can't see them in the chat box at least.
2 participants raise hand, whether they will be able to speak.
I think we should unmute people so that if they want, they can ask their questions straight away.
Yes, you can go ahead, unmute and ask the question.
No, ma'am, they can write a question only in the
Oh, I
chat
see,
box.
I see, I see.
Hmm.
I think one question is there, treatment for febrile
Treatment for?
Treatment for?
febrile convulsions.
Febrile convulsions, actually, until and you have to get down the fever. That is very important. Until and unless there is a repeated episode, you usually don't give any anti-epileptic drug as such. But you have to caution the family, the mother especially, that she should, the moment the child gets a fever, they have to do some physical sponging and get the temperature down. That is very important. In case it goes on happening and it doesn't abort, then you can use a rectal diazepam suppository. That is what the pediatrician recommend. But usually standing epileptics, they don't give. But of course, those who have history of febrile convulsion, they might land up having a seizure attack later on in their life. They might get it, but that only time will say.
I think Dr. Sovana, you just also explain them that whatever I have told you earlier, that after epileptic seizures, sometimes patients go to cardiac arrest.
Yes.
It may be due to a prolonged apnea, or it may be due to the different arrhythmias. This may happen. Maybe
Yes,
some sort of electrolyte imbalance, this may happen.
right.
So in that case, whenever the patient is on cardiac arrest, we have to intubate them and to manage accordingly. So
Yes.
how we can manage them? That you can just details in the details.
Those who have that is why it is very important to abort the convulsion when it is happening, because then the vocal cord goes into a spasm and then hypoxia, and they land up with cardiac arrest or permanent hypoxic brain damage. That is why, along with if we are giving 2 doses of midazolam and we have already tried phenytoin or levetiracetam as we do in our hospital, and still it doesn't get aborted, then it is better to get the airway into our hands. We intubate and ventilate the patient and then start a midazolam infusion. Suppose the patient arrests, then immediate CPR, and we have to find out whether there is any VF or VT going on. That treatment would be, that part of management, cardiac resuscitation, CPR, would be like for any other patient. Here, once again, levetiracetam is safe to abort seizures, because once the cardiac arrest happens, that is of utmost importance to start CPR and send as much of blood circulation to the brain as possible to prevent a permanent hypoxic damage. We would not be using a phenytoin or fosphenytoin over here in case of arrhythmias. It's better to use levetiracetam, lacosamide, which are much, much safer, or even a valproate. But nowadays, everybody goes for levetiracetam. That is proven beyond doubt. Very easy to infuse, no known side effects as such, and safety profile is very good. But the new molecule, the breveracetam, which has come out and which has become a fashion these days, that is actually not to be taken as a first line agent, because the dictum even still now from the Epilepsy Society of India is levetiracetam and not breveracetam. So there are many people using breveracetam, but that should not be, I think.
So if there is no further question, I think we can conclude the session.
Okay.
Organizers, will you say something?
I think in spite of knowing everything, dealing with so many patients, those people who deal with neurology patients, still then we are stuck with patients at times to stop the seizure, or how far to go, or what to give when. So I think it is an evolving science, and it will go on evolving. Even now, you know, especially in COVID era, we have got certain patients, even some doctors, who are having so much of refractory convulsions that we've had to use bolus of ketamine again and again, which I have never seen before. So I think all this is evolving, and these guidelines will go on changing as science changes. So I think there is a lot many learning to do.
So thank you very much, Dr. Shobana.
Thank you,
So
Shubhra.
we should conclude the session today. Thank you very much. Thank you all the participants.
Thank you all, and wishing you a very Merry Christmas and a great New Year ahead. Hope, let us, for all of us, let there be peace, happiness, good health. Let the pandemic end.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.